Well, hello. Great to be here. My name is Richard Campbell. I make a lot of podcasts. Any .NET Rocks listeners in the room? Oh, a couple here and there. Hi. My friend Carl Franklin started .NET Rocks back in 2002, well before the word podcast. And yes, we have 1,999 episodes. Yeah. 2000's already in the can. We recorded it back at the MVP Summit. But it'll publish another week or so from now. And then run ads and tablet show, and for whatever reason I decided that wasn't enough, so I started doing Windows Weekly as well, because 3 shows a week apparently, that's me. But what we're talking about today is all driven by the Geek Outs, which is the series that I do as part of .NET Rocks on whatever geeky subjects that the audience wants. Back in the good old days, we were making 3 shows a week. 1 show a month would be a Geek Out. And now we're down to a show a week, so really a couple of times a year, typically at the holiday season, I'll do an update on the state of power generation on the planet and an update on space. This is largely derived from that. The whole series, this whole thing started with the moon-based Geek Out, doing talks about this. So I did this Geek Out back in 2017, and then NASA called, which is a pretty good day. And they asked me if I would do a talk, because they only knew me as a podcast. Like, hey, we really like a show about the moon base. I'm like, cool, thanks. That's really neat. NASA listens to my moon-based podcast. They're like, would you consider doing it as a talk? And I'm like, they don't know what I do, right? I'm like, yeah, I could do a talk. It's like, do you know how to use PowerPoint? Because we like PowerPoint at NASA. I'm like, yeah, Chuck, yeah, I could handle PowerPoint. It's like, well, we'd really like you to come down and do a talk. And I'm like, great. To who? Well, to us. NASA? Yeah. You know, it's your stuff that I'm talking about. Like, yeah. So you want me to talk to you about your stuff? Yeah. Okay. So later that year, I went down to NASA Ames, which is outside of San Francisco, and there's my big name, my mother's proud, up on the board, driving into the facility, and did an hour with a bunch of engineers and scientists from NASA about my take on the moon base problem. And that's sort of the first time I'd done a space-based talk, and then the conferences found out that I could do a space-based talk, and they're, why would you do that for us? And I'm like, it's not about software development, but they're like, no, we really want to. Okay, so, and this is derived from that, but it's this spacefaring civilization thing. I really want to catch up on where we're at, and then like, what are the next steps? How much further can we go? What's reasonable? What's not science fiction or speculation, or we must invent, new science here to do this? What we actually can do and are doing to really live and work in space. And I don't know that I have to convince this crowd particularly hard that space is a worthwhile endeavor. We're pretty sure that if the dinosaurs had had a space program, they'd still be around now. This idea of planetary defense is a real thing. NASA has a group called Planetary Defense, and they deal with a lot of different subjects in this area. The classic one, the ones that most people focus on, is asteroid defense, right? The same thing that wiped out the dinosaurs. Could we actually do something about it? And by the way, we're really making progress on that subject. Back a few years ago, we did the DART mission, where we actually flew an impactor into an asteroid to see if we could modify its orbit. The answer is yes. It went extremely well. So this was actually a binary system of a reasonable sized asteroid, maybe about 780 meters across, with a little guy orbiting around it, about 160 meters across. Just a little one. They're Didymos and Dimorphos. And I think I actually have the sequence here. So this is photographs taken from the DART mission as it's approaching the asteroid. It's every few minutes they were taking another picture. They're getting closer, closer. And they're moving pretty fast at this point, 6.6 kilometers a second. And so, yeah, they keep on getting closer. They've also got 2 smaller satellites following behind, taking pictures of the bigger satellite coming into impact. Now, it's not a huge satellite. It's like 500 kilos. But it's going very quickly. And now we're going frame by frame, a little slower, a little slower, and a little slower. And then the frame doesn't finish for a very good reason. And it makes contact with vigor, as it is described by NASA. The photographs from the CanSats behind it showed this huge flash. It turns out that the Didymos, or the Didymoon, the little guy, was just a rubble pile. Nothing solid in, just a lot of rocks that were hanging together with very, very little gravity. And those rocks went everywhere. The goal had been to see if they could alter the orbit by about maybe a minute, 70 seconds, I think was the intended goal. And they actually modified the orbit by over half an hour. So the kinetic effects of pounding against all those rocks in the spray clearly change things a lot more. They figure the impact of a 500 kilo spacecraft moving at 6.6 kilometers a second sprayed about 1,000 metric tons of debris off of this little asteroid. And so it now orbits a bit closer to its parent asteroid. And the reason they picked that pair was that it's easy to see from the Earth. It is not Earth crossing at all, so there's no risk to us per se, but they just wanted to be able to take measurements. Asteroids are very small and they're very dark, so it's hard to see them. And so there's now a new mission going up called Hera, which is to go back to this combination binary system and take more detailed photos and study it as we're at the beginnings of actually being able to modify an asteroid's trajectory so that it doesn't impact the Earth. We have a chance to not go the way of the dinosaurs. It's a good thing to do in space, not the only thing to do in space. This skill set leads us to the idea of could we actually start mining asteroids? Like that is a mechanism and some ideas for, if you're going to be a spacefaring civilization, you're going to have to be able to take care of those resources. So resource extraction is another reason to be up there, things we can actually do up there. And of course, there's always the explorer types that are going to get up to trouble, so we should give them something to do. But also it tends to be inspirational. You know, when these crazy, weird humans that are willing to be astronauts and jeopardize their lives send us video of what they're up to. Right? And we just had this experience this April for the first time in a long time of humans getting out of low Earth orbit and getting a look around. So we always have explorers, and it's useful to keep them around. Okay. There's our justification. Let's talk a little bit about where we actually are at right now, because the hard part right now for everything going to space is getting into orbit. This is Heinlein's old line that once you get to low Earth orbit, you're like halfway to everywhere. And we've been getting better at that. In science fiction, we talked a long time about building a space elevator, the idea that we could actually suspend a cable. It's actually a tether around at the equator, so we could just take an elevator up and down. This is really at the ultimate limit of material science. It might be possible, but it's actually not that good of an idea. Like there's lots of problems with it. It's a very difficult cable to build. It's extremely long. It would be about 80,000 kilometers long. It's going to be a bunch of cables. The biggest issue you're going to have is if you go via the equator up to geostationary orbit, which would be the other end of this tether, you have to go through the thickest part of the Van Allen belts. And you have to go through relatively slowly. Like even if that elevator's really buzzing along, like moving at high speed, you know, say 400 kilometers an hour, it's almost 4 days to get to the end of the tether. And you're going to spend a good chunk of a day and a half moving through these high radiation zones. Now the Artemis 2 mission just did this, but they did not go through the equatorial side. They did a high looping orbit where the fields are much smaller, and they were booking it. They went through there in about 3 minutes, which is the way to go. And that's the upside to actually having a spacecraft. In a lot of ways, we've now done things with spacecraft that have kind of made this tether idea not as necessary. SpaceX's ability to reuse spacecraft, and now with a Blue Origin doing it well, has started to lower the price to low Earth orbit to the point where it's not economical to do anything else. Now, we've seen a lot of Starship, although it's been quiet for a little while. These are nutty missions. The lower boosters runs for about 2.5 minutes to push that Starship up high enough. Then it turns around, flies back, and gets caught by the landing arms, which seems insane until you see them do it. And you're like, okay, I guess it's not insane. But that's the mission profile, and in theory, they go up into orbit, and that upper stage is supposed to be able to deorbit, re-enter, and land, and be reused. Hasn't happened yet. They've never completely finished in orbit. They have genuinely flown this thing like it's a real rocket. There's the catch. I just sat and stared like this can't possibly be real. That is a 25-story, multi-ton building that flies being caught out of the sky. Okay. It's on fire a little bit, but you know, details. Not that everything goes right for Starship, right? The upper stage of that same mission, that was IFT-7, was later seen in a fireworks show over the Caribbean. And they had to clear aircraft out of the way as it came down in little bits. Now those are all Gen 2 Starships. They're now about to fly the first Gen 3 Starship. They're not the only game in town. Blue Origin now has flown their New Glenn for the third time, although it also had problems. This is not quite as big as Starship, but it is an extremely big rocket. Starship is a 9-meter in diameter rocket. New Glenn is a 7-meter in diameter rocket. So that's much bigger than most other rockets. The payloads are much, much larger. And it's part of the problem with this latest New Glenn mission is the second stage has malfunctioned, and it's 23 meters long and 7 meters in diameter and weighs about 20 metric tons empty, and it's going to come down somewhere. Like normally they would carefully deorbit that upper stage, but it broke, and now we don't know where it's going to come down. And very likely some of it will survive. You generally don't allow things that large to deorbit uncontrolled, so that's not good. What has SpaceX then done? This is the only numbers in this whole thing. Everything else is going to be pictures and videos. Here's the graph. So our old vehicles, stuff like Atlas V, ran about 13,000 to 15,000 a kilo to low Earth orbit. Falcon 9, the most flown rocket in the world, just completed 600th landing across a certain number of boosters. The most landed boosters like at 35 times now. That's your cheap ride to space. If you have a choice, that's the rocket you take at about 3,000 a kilo. Falcon Heavy is actually cheaper, but only if you use the full payload capacity of Falcon Heavy, which nobody's ever done. So it's why we rarely fly Heavy. Its payload fairing is too small for the amount of weight that it can lift, so it's kind of a mangled rocket. Vulcan is the replacement for Atlas V, and it got its price down there. New Glenn, we're starting to get real numbers now. We're pretty sure that 3,000 per kilo is correct at full payload, which again, they've never done. They've only flown relatively light payloads. The Space Launch System, which I have to talk about, it's the one that just recently flew, is just about the most expensive way to fly into space at about 58,000 a kilo. I would argue the Space Shuttle was actually more expensive at about 60,000 a kilo. Starship, should it work, and to be clear, it doesn't yet, presumably it will, we're talking under 500 a kilo. Some people say as low as $20 a kilo. So now you're talking about the price of a first-class ticket for you and your life support to go into orbit. That's pretty compelling. And it does absolutely change the game again. So, I mean, SpaceX, as much as I have concerns about Elon lately, you know, I miss the guy who flew his sports car to space. That was pretty cool. But this guy, I'm not so sure about. But he has absolutely changed the game in space. He lowered the price by an order of magnitude and is working hard to lower it by another order of magnitude. Okay, so LEO is in a different state now. We fly in, you can see now that we're having tourist missions, that we're flying other payloads, we're flying a lot more satellites. We had about 3,000 operational satellites before Starlink came along. Now we have about 13,000 operational satellites, being still the original 3,000 and 10,000 Starlinks. And a bunch of other companies are talking about launching a lot more satellites as well. We have this International Space Station, continuously inhabited since about 2000. It's not the only space station. The Chinese have the Tiangong, which has also been continuously inhabited since they set it up. This guy's finally wearing out. It'll be done by about 2030, even that's a stretch. The oldest modules, which are the Russian ones, are starting to crack. Their aluminum is aging out. They have plumbing problems. There's mold growing in them. There's no easy way to repair them. There's no easy to replace any of these components. When they birth these components together, it's metal on metal, and after a little time in orbit, it's just one piece of metal. So they were designed to be assembled. They were not designed to be disassembled. And so pretty much the whole thing has to go back down again before they lose control of it. It cannot be uninhabited. As soon as people leave this thing, they will lose control of it. It needs constant maintenance and supervision. They would like to build better space stations, but they'd rather rent time on them. I'm saying NASA. So NASA has a commercial space station initiative, which they had a lot of different proposals for. Many of these have already fallen away. They likely won't happen, but the idea is they want to buy time on space stations. They'd rather have more smaller space stations around. Blue Origin proposed the largest, called Orbital Reef. This depends on New Glenn, which nice that New Glenn is now flying, so it is somewhat possible. This would be very large. This particular one here would be 3 of the modules tied together. Each one of these modules is 300 cubic meters. So combined, this would be all the space that the International Space Station has and more. Again, you probably don't want a space station this big, but they're capable of it. The projects I think that are actually the furthest along are Axiom Space. This is a bunch of ex-International Space Station guys. They've been flying private astronauts, tourists, to the International Space Station for a while now. Those are all the Axiom missions. They rent Crew Dragons to do it. And they want to assemble a space station attached to the PMA of the existing International Space Station with the intent to, before it's deorbited, detach from it and become an independent station. They have actually bent metal. They have one module completed. They're hoping to fly it this year or next and have it on the space station, and while they complete the rest. So rather than having to build a space station from scratch, being able to take advantage of the old station to do the building with it. I hope they succeed. It's a good mission, and they know what they're doing. They just need, mostly it's funding. These are expensive things, and nobody's figured out, nobody's sure that a space station can actually be profitable. The other fun one is a company called VAST. This is a crypto bro who's made enough on crypto, decided he wanted to make a space station, and he's just plain going for it. So these are single launch, self-contained space stations designed for short-term habitation, maybe 90 to 180 days. Single lift, designed to be connected by a Crew Dragon, and so low cost. Their original plan, they had no support from NASA when they started out, and their original plan was to fly by 2025. That did not happen. They are now at 2027, but they've done well enough and are serious enough, this is real metal, that NASA is now pulled them into the commercial program, and so they are now allowed, you can now get a seat to the space station through VAST if you wish to. I'm not excited about the prospect of crypto bros being on the space station, but okay. So, station action is going on. There's going to be a generation of space stations after the International Space Station. We're not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but that part's going to continue. So let's talk about the moon. This is my favorite picture of the moon, and it's not fake. That's the problem these days. There's lots of fake pictures of everything. What's cool, the question you have to ask when you look at this picture is, who took this picture? This is a tricky picture to take. You're looking at the far side of the moon and a full disk of the Earth. This is off the Discover satellite. This is a solar weather satellite in the L1 Lagrange point between the sun and the Earth. So it's 1.5 million kilometers away from the Earth. And it has a telescope pointing back at Earth. And it doesn't have to be a telescope because it's 1.5 million kilometers away. And because it always sits directly between the sun and the Earth, it always gets a full disk picture of the Earth. And that's what they do with it. They routinely take photos of the Earth. And every so often, the moon whizzes through the frame. And I mean whizzes through the frame. In fact, it's not a color photograph. It's one black and white lens with different filters on it. And so to make a color picture, they actually snap 4 pictures, one after the other. And it's long range, so there's long exposure. And this is one of the ways you can, if you look really close to the picture, you'll notice that the right side of the moon has a little green haze on it. And that's because they took the green picture last and the moon moved. So it's blurred. It's the kind of thing CGI wouldn't have done. But it's a great picture. I love it a lot. And just a reminder that we've been to the moon, right? We had the Apollo missions. The Americans sent 12 men, 12 white men, to the moon. 11 of them were test pilots. One of them, Jack Schmitt, in the bottom right-hand corner there, is a scientist. He was a geologist. He's the only scientist to ever walk on the moon. There's Jack right there. You'll notice Jack is dirty because Jack's a geologist, and geologists really like rocks. And so he got real close to the rocks a lot. In fact, he's the only human where we've ever had a photograph of his face walking on the moon, because Jack really liked looking at the rocks. And so he kept lifting his gold visor up because it was changing the color of the rocks and he wanted to see them properly. Now, this is an insanely dumb thing to do because the sun has no filters and it will burn your retina out immediately. And if you ever listen to the audio of their conversation on Apollo 17, you'll hear Capcom regularly say, Jack, when you get a minute, would you put your visor down? Only Jack ever lifted the visor. The nature of test pilots is the test pilots are always thinking, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up, don't screw up. The geologist is looking at the rocks. Notice in this picture, there's some stuff stuck in his helmet. Let's see if I can get this to work. On the right side of his helmet there's some white cards. He's actually been ripping the cards off his arm that are the time step cards for everything they're supposed to do on the moon. As they finish them, he's tearing them off and sticking them in his helmet to block the sunlight so he can lift his visor to look at the rocks. Like, Jack's very serious. That guy got 22 hours on the moon and found more important geology than all the test pilots combined. Because you can't teach someone to look for anomalies, to look for exceptions. You have to know. When you're a scientist, you know what to expect of the rocks. And so, you don't find things by going, Eureka, I found it. You find things by going, what the heck is that? Which Jack did a lot and found some of the most important rocks of the entire Apollo mission. Imagine what would happen if we had a bunch of scientists up there for a while, for all of the things that could be found and could be explored. Now, Apollo couldn't end soon enough. It was a very dangerous mission. It was a great nation competition between the Soviets and the Americans. And there were so many failure modes, especially with the lunar lander, that were not survivable. It's really a miracle that no astronauts were lost on the moon. There were astronauts lost in the Apollo project. The Apollo 1 astronauts died in fire on the pad. But this lander was the minimum possible. The only way they pulled this off is by a huge number of people working very hard, constantly checking. It's very fortunate. And they cut back the mission as quickly as they could because they had won, so to speak. But at least they did a little bit of science. And now we're back to talking about the moon again after 50, 60 years. This is the Artemis project. Artemis being the sister to Apollo, if you're into Greek mythology. And I'd point out that there are a bunch of nations involved in the Artemis program, including the Australian Space Agency. So I don't know if you guys are going to get a guy up on the moon, but we just got a Canadian to go around the moon. It's a pretty good day. And we've had a couple of Artemis missions already. The original is Artemis 1, which is unmanned. They did a bunch of orbital experiments with the Orion capsule, stuff they wouldn't do with people in it, just to prove that they understood orbital mechanics better than they ever have before. Our software's better, our technology's better, and we really did push the limits of what the vehicle was capable of doing. And then just recently, we did Artemis 2. This was originally scheduled for 2024, then it was bumped to 2025, and it actually happened April 10th, 1st to 10th in 2026. And you've seen these. This just captured the world. I think we'd forgotten about the power of sending humans doing exploration. Sure, we'd had people go around and even walk on the moon before. It was a very long time ago, and it certainly wasn't in HD. And we got some astonishing pictures of a group of people in a small can that had never had people flown in it before, going a long way away from home and back again. So they took some chances here. They did not go into orbit around the moon. They literally just did a free return trajectory around the moon and back. On the way, that's coming in towards the moon, so the moon's getting bigger in their window. And then our current favorite picture, the Earth set picture, this is them now going around the moon and looking back at the Earth. And they zoomed, because they were so far from the moon, the fact that the moon's that large means they zoomed in a lot, so the Earth looks really big in proportion here. And then, of course, they got the eclipse shot, which is, imagine you'd be the only 4 people seeing that eclipse. And they even had the little glasses to wear, too. Because same danger, it's going to burn your eyes if you don't protect yourself. And they returned successfully. All good stuff. We're still evaluating. That literally just happened a few weeks ago. So the next mission was supposed to be Artemis 3, which originally proposed actually landing on the moon. This is not happening. The landers aren't ready, and so Jared Isaacman, the new NASA administrator, has made a bunch of proposals. Back in February, before they even flew Artemis 2, he laid out this graphic, which we have analyzed to the nth degree to say what is he actually talking about in the changes to the Artemis program. One of the problems with Artemis is the SLS especially, this Space Launch System, which is really modified shuttle parts. It would be a very cool rocket if it was 1999. Now it's just really old. The real limiting factor is this little guy here, what they call the interim cryogenic propellant stage, the upper stage. So that's what can fly them to the moon, but it's very underpowered. They need a bigger one. And the bigger one was called ACES for the Explorer stage. It was much bigger, huge thing, built by Boeing, which is why it's wildly over budget and not finished and doesn't work. Here's the cool picture, the one that I was staring at. It's right there. That's Orion attached to something else. It's not as big as what the ACES stage should be. My guess, and I'm not the only one guessing this, there are people smarter than me, is that's actually a Vulcan Centaur 5 upper stage, what they use on Vulcan. Twin engine, much larger, not as big as what ACES would be, but a lot more potential, and it exists. It already is flying, so it wouldn't be that hard to certify that. So we may get a more powerful version of the SLS yet, just not the thing that they proposed years and years ago that we've never been able to build. Also, this here, 2027, this is Isaacman's big folly, is Artemis 3 is going to stay in low Earth orbit, and it's going to test 2 different landing solutions, one from SpaceX and one from Blue Origin. That's pretty optimistic. So SpaceX's lunar lander is a modified Starship. They've been proposing this for years. They won the contract for this, and it's 50 meters tall, but it can carry 100 metric tons and is fully reusable, which ticks a lot of boxes, except for that you really better find a flat spot to land this thing, because you tip it over, everybody's having a bad day. And it's all fuel in the bottom. There's a ring of engines halfway up for doing the landing without scouring a big hole in the moon. But it also means you're a good 30 meters off the ground when you open the door, so watch that first step. You're probably going to want to take the elevator to get down from there. And this is taking longer to develop. The only way this works is if they actually refuel it. So fly it into orbit around the Earth, then multiple tankers have to come up and fill it up. How many times have we ever refueled a spacecraft in orbit? The answer is none. We've never done this before. And so there's a bunch of different ways to try doing this. All of them make me feel like I should call HR. So this is the side-by-side docking technique. The problem here is that, well, watch. Here's a video inside the Falcon 9 of a liquid oxygen tank. They're under acceleration and suddenly they're not. The engine cuts off. See what the liquid does? It wanders around in the tank. This makes it very hard to pump. Now, when they do relights on the upper stage, which they often do, you'll see them fire little vernier thrusters, just little cold gas thrusters that will settle the fuel back to the tank before they start the engine up again. So if you're going to pump fuel from one ship to another, you have to accelerate to settle the tanks enough to pump the fuel, which also means you change the orbit while you do it. So all of this gets progressively more complicated, especially when you talk about multiple refuelings. There are proposals to build a fuel depot, and now we start to get into, when we talk about a spacefaring civilization, someone who can function in space, part of that is infrastructure. So this is another docking technique, again, a little creepy, but it would work. That's where all the plumbing is, but then how do you settle the fuel? Do you accelerate? Do you rotate? Like, there's some choices there. There's been a proposal to actually make it into a depot. So a ring that you can dock pairs of tanks to, and then when you want to refuel, you dock on the center and you spin the entire assembly, pushes the fuel down to the end so you can pump it, put it in the ship. Bigger idea here is get the full fuel load that the lunar lander is going to need up in space before you send the lander. Instead of having a bunch of tankers that have to keep docking, refuel, and so forth, get them all up there. Get all the fuel in place. Fuel up, go. Also, now we have a market. You'll buy fuel at a certain rate per ton, just get it to the depot. I don't care how you do it. You want to build your own spacecraft, do it yourself? Fine. You want to mine it off the moon, bring it here? Fine. Fuel depot in low Earth orbit, maybe more than one. Fuel depot around the moon, and then markets to be able to keep that fuel going. That's infrastructure, right? That's the beginning of a system to sustain more flight. Now, I just wanted to show the scale here. I don't know if you can see them even at this big screen. That's the guys. This is a really big rocket. It's a little excessive for what we want for a lander, right? And SpaceX won the contract, but so did Blue Origin. But Blue Origin has a much smaller, more compact lander where the human habitated part is on the bottom. The problem is their engine system is liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, which is even harder to store the fuel. When the Apollo missions were going to the moon, the fuel that they used on the lunar lander was hypergolic fuels. These are very toxic, very powerful fuels that we generally don't use now because they kill people very easily, but they store well. They don't have to be kept cold. They don't care about sunlight. And so they were very useful. They're part of what made Apollo dangerous. You've seen, they use hypergolic fuels for the directional thrusters, even on Artemis. And if you watch that, painfully long process where the boats came up to get to Artemis and put the ring and so forth on. One of the very first things they did was they went around the entire ship measuring concentrations of nitrogen tetroxide, the poisonous stuff that comes out of those little thrusters. Back in the old days of the space shuttle, when the shuttle would land, a big truck would show up that looked like a vacuum truck, because it was, and would literally vacuum off all the nozzles to make sure they got all the nitrogen tetroxide off. It's just dangerous stuff. And so we want to use cryogenic fuels, just we don't know how to store them over an extended period of time. Next problem, besides the landers, is the spacesuit. So we've had spacesuits that have operated on the moon. You can go see them at the Kennedy Space Center or in Houston if you want to. The longest that any of those suits have ever spent on the moon, 22 hours. And in those 22 hours, they were seriously damaged. The regolith of the moon is very abrasive. It's also electrostatic, so it tends to stick things. It scratched the visors, it damaged the interlocks, it damaged the valves. And NASA wants 800-hour suits. It's a huge goal. The company currently leading to develop this suit that's the furthest along is Axiom. The same guys who are building the space station are working on a moon suit. And they're pretty close, but they're still not ready even for testing. And there's lots of testing to do to know whether or not the suit design is going to be adequate. So it's the other pacing item in this. Okay, where do they want to go? They want to go to the South Pole. All the Apollo missions landed roughly in the equatorial area facing Earth. It was a limit of the technology of the time and telemetry. But the water ice seems to be on the South Pole. This is an animation of the Shackleton crater directly on the South Pole. And once again, you should ask the question, who took this picture? And who took this picture was the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which every time it passed over Shackleton would add another photo, and they eventually assembled a montage of an entire lunar year over the Shackleton crater. And the reason was to show that there are parts of the Shackleton crater that never get sunlight ever, and there are parts of the rim that get sunlight almost the entire year round. So it's an interesting combination. This Shackleton crater is large. It would fit 30 Sydneys in it. And there are several billion tons of water ice in it, we think. All the measurements we've done believe there, but until you've actually gotten the ice, you don't know for sure if you've got it. So there are unmanned missions, robotic missions, to go to these continuously shaded places and extract water ice to prove we know the form of the ice, we know how to actually pull it out of the regolith, and we can melt it and make water from it. And if you have water, well, you have a resource. We have never, ever used resources in situ anywhere in the solar system with any of our spacecraft. We have always brought absolutely everything we needed with you, like loading up the caravan to go on vacation and never opening the doors again until you get home. That's a serious smell. But further to infrastructure, if we're going to do this, because this is a difficult place to communicate from and very rough terrain to land in, we need more precise landing equipment. Right now we have to carry everything on the spacecraft ourselves, and we're doing image matching and all these tricks to try and work on it. There's a proposal from the European Space Agency called Moonlight, which is actually a GPS cell network for the moon. Now, the moon is substantially smaller than the Earth. It's about the total area of Australia. Overall. And so with relatively few satellites, we think about 12 in looping orbit, so they wouldn't be in low Earth orbit. The moon's gravity is unstable. It's got a variation of about 2%. So anything you put in low moon orbit ends up crashing after a relatively short amount of time. So with something like the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, we've been up there since 2009, we have these long looping orbits where we go far away and then we come back and zoom by and take our pictures and then come back again. And it's in a pacing orbit, so it actually covers everything. So if we had a bunch of these satellites doing those sets of moves, no matter where you went on the moon, you could see 3 of them at all times, which means you can triangulate your location and you can communicate without having to carry all that equipment yourself. So putting a network like this up increases our ability to operate the moon, more infrastructure. I would point out the Chinese have already put up a satellite like this on the far side of the moon for their Chang'e landers, of which they now have 2, so that they can communicate with them because they're on the other side of the moon. So we could go further than that. And then the goal is to build a base. Now this is what Elon thinks when he says base, which I guess makes sense because it looks an awful lot like Burning Man. And he likes his ketamine, so okay. Actually, you know what this reminds me of? Anybody ever see Space 1999? It's an old British science fiction show. If you ever saw it, you have very fond memories of it as a child. Do not watch it again. your memories are vastly superior to the actual show. The idea was that we were storing nuclear waste on the moon, and then one day it all went off and sent the moon on adventures. Anyway, what are we really going to build for a habitat? It's a hard radiation environment. We need to protect ourselves. The European Space Agency model was to basically build an igloo. So a pressure vessel, an airlock, connected to an inflatable dome. You would land softly, you'd inflate the dome, and then you use robots to bury it in a meter or so of regolith to protect you from the radiation. Because you want to be able to not be exposed to radiation all the time. Arguably, if we're going to go bigger, we might start using the skylights. So in various locations around the moon, we've had enough volcanic activity that were actually volcanic flows of lava that when they retreated left behind huge tunnels, kilometers across. Big ones. One of the largest is the Marius skylight. So what this is where that tunnel formed so close to the surface that at some point the roof of it collapsed in. And now we have this exposed tunnel underground. That's 65 meters across and at least 80 meters deep. We've never measured it. There's a couple of missions planning to go there. But you can imagine just building an inflatable habitat that you could put down in there, slide into the tunnel and inflate, and you've got built-in radiation protection. And you've got that Dr. No, I fly up out of the hole thing. Like, that'd be good. But there's a bunch of ways for us to hang out on the moon. We just have to build things that will actually keep people healthy while we do it. So what are we going to do while we're up there? Well, there's lots of construction to do, so we're going to need to build robots to do the construction. But there's also working with resources. So water ice is the first one, but there's lots of good minerals up there. Silicon, titanium, rare earths, so we can imagine automated machines doing the prospecting, and ultimately we can do refining, start to extract some of these minerals. In fact, the mineral composition of the moon is remarkably similar to the ingredients list for solar panels. And fundamentally, solar panels are a set of crystals, and the biggest problem to growing big crystals is gravity. So there's an argument that if we actually work this out and we're using local materials, we can grow higher quality crystals on the moon than we ever could on Earth. So we might want to prefer to use moon-based solar panels. Not that it makes a lot of sense to make stuff on the moon and fly it all the way back to Earth. Well, not entirely. We certainly could put solar panels on the moon. In fact, this was a Japanese proposal to literally put solar panels all the way around the moon, which is a bit nuts. You know, it's like, let's put solar panels from Sydney to Perth. Well, we don't need to do that. What we could do is we could send them back to Earth, maybe at least to geostationary orbit. So the nice thing is the gravity well of the moon is so low that solar panels that can handle a lot of acceleration, we almost wouldn't need a rocket for this. We could just use a mass accelerator. You only need about 2 kilometers per second, and you'd leave the moon and head towards the Earth. And you can see that little dot beside the Earth. That's a space power station. So this is the most advanced design we know so far for making electricity in space from solar power and beaming it to the surface of the Earth. It's about 1 gigawatt. It's a big structure, about 5 kilometers across, but it'll land about 1 gigawatt of power on the planet. So no emission power generation. The landing site's about 10 kilometers across. It's a big rectenna. The radiation density isn't high enough to like cook birds in flight or anything, but you really wouldn't want to walk around down there. Like, I'd put a fence up. That's just me, you know. But you're landing 1 gigawatt of power with no emissions. That works 24 hours a day. When you're geostationary orbit, it's never dark. The solar panels actually work more efficiently because they're in vacuum. There's another interesting thing you could do with that too. If you can point that thing, you can actually aim it at spacecraft and use it to accelerate spacecraft, externalize your engine. We could start to build a system between the moon. Like, the biggest problem we have with the moon is when you leave the moon now, like, if you think about what Artemis did. When they left the moon, they were moving about 2 kilometers a second. And that was enough to leave the moon and start to fall towards the Earth. And they started to accelerate and accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. An hour before they were going to land, I was watching, they were at 9,000 kilometers an hour. At the point at which they hit the interface with the atmosphere and started to heat up, they were at 28,000 kilometers per hour. And that's the problem. You're moving so quickly, you don't have enough fuel to slow down. Nobody's ever gone back into orbit around the Earth having left it, because the gravity well accelerates you so much, we can't do it. But if we had, you just can't carry the fuel. But what if we had an engine system that was external, that we had one of these things that could actually pass you the energy to slow you down so you could return to orbit around the Earth? That's experimental, but technologically no impossibility. If we started building space-based power like this, it's infrastructure, not just for generating electricity, but also for communicating electricity to spacecraft. And that takes us back to asteroid mining. So once we can do this, and we're moving around, and we figured out how to utilize resources on the moon, now let's start to play with the asteroids that are available. And there are lots of asteroids, huge numbers of asteroids, more than most people realize. I did a whole geek out just on asteroid mining back a few years ago on .NET Rocks if you want to listen to it. There are lots of different kinds of asteroids. This is a C-type asteroid known as Mathilde. It got named because they went to it. Mostly filled with water and volatile, so nitrogen, potassium, that sort of thing. So that's one kind of mining you would do to extract water and those light materials. Then there are S-type asteroids. This is the binary system of Didymos and Dimorphos, full of silicates, and mostly a rubble pile, so relatively easy to work with. You're just picking up rocks and grinding them up, separate out the compounds. And then they're the rarest, the M-type asteroids. This one is called Psyche. We think this might be a planetary core that formed in the early stages of our solar system, and then that planet was ripped apart. It does reside in the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. And Jupiter's kind of a bully that destroys things, but also protects the inner planets, so he's kind of our friend, except for that rips things apart. So we now have a mission to Psyche that launched in 2023, it'll get there in 2029, to map it out and actually measure the metals on this. And most of them are in the platinum classes, so iridium, rhodium, platinum, right? Some expensive materials. And there are millions of tons here. Now, in theory, you could mine up all that platinum and send back to Earth, but you're gonna mess up the platinum market by doing that. But these are useful resources, and actually mining them would be fairly tricky. That's a long way away. You're not going to do this with people, you'll do it with robots. There's been a few designs over the years for this that are mostly solar-based. This is a design by TransAstra called the Honeybee Asteroid Miner, because it's yellow and black. So the idea is you take a relatively small chunk of an asteroid and you put it in a bag, close that bag up, and then you take solar energy, focus it on, and vaporize the rock. And then you use electrostatic and chemical separating to process that vaporized material into different categories that you can then bag up and ship. We've actually built parts of these. So we've tested the mining system and actually vaporized rock with it, demonstrated it will absolutely work. We just have to spend the money to actually scale it up. So you can imagine a solar system where you have machines mining the particular materials you need on these different asteroids and then sending them likely back to the moon. This is the best place for you to put them. Because if we're operating off the moon, we can start building out infrastructure there. It's low gravity well, it's easy for us to operate from, it's not far from the Earth. I mean, you can send those materials back to Earth. It's just probably not worth it. It's more useful to use in space where it's from, and to build things from there. So rather than sending raw materials back to the Earth, you actually do construction in space, perhaps equipment that the Earth wants, but also more equipment for us. So now you get into that, starting to build larger things. You know, so far, everything we've ever built to put into space, we had to launch from the Earth, so it had to fit in a payload fairing, right, to fit inside of a shuttle. And so it's relatively small and it folds out and so forth. Things build differently if you can build them up there. And so if you start getting materials and you have construction methodologies, you can build some pretty cool stuff. Now, a logical place for us to really do a lot of building and expansion would be the far side of the moon. In fact, that's one place where you could put a space elevator. The gravity's low enough. It's relatively, you can do this with aramid fibers like Kevlar would be strong enough to hold up on the far side of the moon. You can't do it on the near side. It's too close to the Earth then, and the Earth gravity disturbance will ultimately tear it apart. But on the far side, it would just sit out there stably, which means when there's no additional radiation concerns, means you can actually easily get to anywhere in the solar system from there. So it's a great place to build out new probes, even new spacecraft, and then send them wherever you want in the solar system. So that progression of infrastructure, refueling systems, power systems, and construction systems based on the far side of the moon equips us as a civilization to now look further afield relatively effectively. The challenge is humans are frail. And if we're going to bring them, we know we want to bring them, but how do we do it? Now, one of the things the International Space Station has spent a lot of time on for us is evaluating humans in space. We've done a few experiments like Scott Kelly, who spent an entire year up there, not just 6 months. But the normal lifestyle for a space station astronaut is 2.5 hours of exercise a day to slow the rate of bone loss. They normally spend 6 months up there, and at the end of 6 months when they arrive, they can't walk. They haven't stepped on their feet for 6 months, which really hurts, and their balance is messed up. It takes about a year of rehab to recover from 6 months on the space station, which begs the question, if we were really going to fly people to Mars, which by the way takes 6 months, there's nobody there to help them when they get there. So we kind of need to figure out artificial gravity. The biggest problem we have for humans is cerebral spinal fluid in free fall. So this is, you've got two little glands in your brain that produces fluid that essentially washes the brain, takes debris out from the brain, and it naturally flows down your spinal cord and then does exchange with your kidneys. And even bedridden patients need to be sat up regularly, pretty much every day, to help that fluid move, or it builds up in their heads and causes problems. Everybody that goes to the International Space Station has this problem. The fluid builds up in their head, their faces get really puffy, and there's enough fluid in their head that it actually bends their eyes. And so they go up with sets of reading glasses over the course of the mission. This is even on Artemis. You'll notice they kept wearing different pairs of glasses because their eyes keep changing shape from the cerebral spinal fluid buildup. Problematic. There's no simple answers here. Now, we don't have any way to create artificial gravity using some kind of fancy electronics. We're not doing the Star Trek thing. We don't know how that works. It's science fiction. But science fact is, build a rotating structure. The problem is it has to be big enough. We've never really put centrifuges in orbit. We've certainly never put them on the space station because the space station is a microgravity laboratory. And if you put a centrifuge on it, you're going to shake the whole station. One of the things we can look forward to when the new commercial stations start to fly is we will start to build some centrifuge experiments there and start to learn more about how humans can cope with centrifuges. So we built this map now of the sort of comfort zone of how big something has to be based on its rotational rate. The problem is the real Coriolis effect, not the one that they keep talking about how, you know, Australia's toilets flush the other way around. I love that one. Now, admittedly, your cyclones spin the other way. That's real, that's large scale. But in space, in a rotating structure, the Coriolis effect is actually the effective rotation on your vestibular system. So if you're in a cylinder or in a ring that is rotating, the gravity difference between your feet and your head is enough, if the ring is too small, that when you turn your head to the side, you will tip over. It's very hard to maintain your balance. And so we have to expand the ring large enough that the gravity differential between the top of the head and the feet isn't that substantial. And so to generate 1 G at a low enough rotational rate to not cause disturbance, you're talking about something nearly 100 meters across. The biggest thing we've ever lifted into space is 6 meters across. So we'd have to build that. 100 meters is awfully big. And there's been lots of proposals for various rotating structures. This was a NASA proposal called Nautilus X, where the rotating ring in the middle there is actually inflated. And it's not 100 meters across, it's about 40. One of the experiments we have to do is, do we really need 1 G? I mean, if you're going to Mars, there's only 1/3 of a G there anyway. Could we keep people healthy at 1/3 of a G? And it's one of the things we could experiment with on the moon because we're already in 1/6 G. So what does 1/6 G do to our bodies? What maintenance do we need to do compared to free fall in the space station? It's another set of experiments to be done. And while I'm tapping science fiction here in The Martian, this is the Hermes from The Martian. Their science is pretty solid in this, and their rotating structure is not a solid ring, but rather 4 compartments, separate and rotating together to balance each other. And so at least you would sleep in normal gravity, or at least partial gravity, which is good for your body. But a lot of the working structures, like the capsule and so forth, are in free fall. There is another problem here, which is that virtually every astronaut gets space sick going into free fall. And it takes 2 or 3 days to adapt. It's why the first couple of days of the Orion mission, you saw no pictures of the astronauts. They were all ill. And they didn't want those pictures to be out there. But once their bodies got used to being in free fall, then they were fine. What happens when you change back and forth every day? Like, we don't know if you'll adapt to that. That you sleep in a gravity well, but then you have to work in free fall for a certain number of hours and then go back into the gravity well. These are all things we need to learn to build out these structures so can the body adapt to this. The body's pretty resilient. We do crazy things in space. You know, most stuff works normally. All your peristaltic systems work normally. You can digest food, your blood pumps. You can't burp because it's all floating around in the stomach, right? Well, you can burp, and I've seen the video of the guys on the space station showing you how to do this because you have to back up against a wall, get ready to burp, and then you accelerate to make everything fall down, and then you burp. And if you get it wrong, you clean it up. But, you know, this is the nature of human adaptation. We can make this work. And that does open the door possibly to Mars. Not that I think we should colonize Mars. I don't think we should. I think it's a good science experiment. I think we should explore Mars. But why would we want to live in another gravity well? And if you think about what we've just gone through here in this progression towards being a spacefaring civilization, learning to use resources in space and build larger structures, well, the next logical thing would be to build habitats. Say we put together enough material to put together what we call an O'Neill cylinder, maybe 7 kilometers long, kilometer in diameter, rotating at about 4 RPM. So it's 1 G on the inner surface. It'll hold 5 to 10 million people. And you'd be living in a funny landscape. You know, your ground would be curving up around you, but it would feel pretty normal. And if you want to go into space, you just take an elevator to the center access and you're back to free fall. And you can fly off where you want to go. No digging your way out of a gravity well. And there's been many proposals like this, these O'Neill cylinders. This is something that Jeff Bezos has talked a lot about because billionaires want to go to space, sort of. And we have enough materials just from asteroids in the solar system to build about 10 million of these. That's trillions of humans. You'd probably put most of them in an orbit somewhere between the Earth and Venus, so you'd get a bit more solar power. But they'd be functional habitats, and they would last. You just have to maintain them and operate them, and we'd have a lot of choices that way. It's a lot more flexible than trying to just go back to the few gravity wells that exist out there. Now, I think we should explore them all, but if we want new places to live and take pressure off the Earth, this is one of the options. I hope this was useful for you. I really appreciate your time. If you like these shows, go to geekout.show, and it'll take you to the .NET Rocks list of all the Geek Outs. There's about 100 of them. Thank you for your time.